Today we're travelling back to 1870 to a small settlement in Oregon's Willamette Valley. We're going to spend 24 hours with the people who made it to Oregon, the ones who survived the 2,000-mile journey on the Oregon Trail and are now trying to build new lives in what they still call the frontier, even though Oregon became a state 11 years ago. This isn't the story of the trail itself, the covered wagons, the river crossings, the dramatic journey westward. This is what happened after. This is about the people who arrived with everything they owned in a wagon, claimed land under the Donation Land Act, and started the hard work of turning forest into farm. Before we begin, let me know. Which part of the world are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? The settlement we're visiting doesn't have an official name yet. It's a scattering of homesteads in the Willamette Valley, centred around a small cluster of buildings that the 30 or so families in the area call town, though it's really just a general store, a church that doubles as a schoolhouse and a blacksmith shop. The nearest real town, Oregon City, is 2 days away by wagon over terrible roads. It's September 1870. The late summer heat has finally broken, but the autumn rains haven't started in earnest yet. This brief window of dry weather is precious. There's harvesting to finish, wood to cut and stack for winter, 100 urgent tasks that must be completed before the rains come and turn everything to mud for the next 8 months. The sun rises around 6 o'clock, but people have been awake for an hour already. Farm life doesn't wait for daylight. On a homestead claim 3 miles from town, Sarah and Thomas Brennan are already at work. They're both in their 30s, married for 12 years, with 4 living children. They had 6, but 2 died during the crossing 5 years ago. The Brennans arrived in Oregon in 1865 with a wagon, 2 oxen, some tools, seed grain and hope. What they didn't have was money, farming experience, or any idea how different Oregon would be from their native Ohio. Their claim is 320 acres under the Donation Land Act, which gave free land to settlers who could prove they'd cultivated it for 4 years. The Brennans are in their 5th year, so the land is officially theirs now. But of those 320 acres, only about 15 are cleared and under cultivation. The rest is forest, massive Douglas firs, some over 200 feet tall and 6 feet in diameter. Clearing this land is the work of years, maybe decades. Sarah is in the kitchen, a lean-to addition to their one-room log cabin, making breakfast. The cabin is rough, log walls chinked with mud and moss, a dirt floor, 1 small window with oiled paper instead of glass, a stone fireplace that smokes badly, and a roof of split cedar shakes that leaks in places. They've been living here for 5 years, and it's still not really finished. There's always something more urgent than home improvements. She's cooking on a cast-iron stove they hauled across the plains, one of their few valuable possessions. Breakfast is salt pork, fried cornmeal mush, and coffee. The coffee is mostly chicory with a little real coffee mixed in. Coffee is expensive and has to be brought from Oregon City. The salt pork is from a hog they slaughtered last month. The cornmeal is from last year's crop. Every meal is carefully calculated based on what they have stored and what they can afford to use. While Sarah cooks, Thomas is already outside with their oldest son, 15-year-old James, checking on the livestock. They have 2 milk cows, 6 pigs, about 20 chickens and the 2 oxen. The oxen are essential. They're the only way to move heavy loads, pull the plough, or haul logs. If something happened to those oxen, the family would be in serious trouble. Thomas and James are feeding the animals and checking for any problems. One of the pigs seems sick, lethargic and not eating. Thomas makes a mental note to ask at the store if anyone knows what might be wrong. There's no veterinarian within 50 miles, so animal medicine is a combination of folk remedies, advice from neighbours, and hope. The Brennans' other 3 children are stirring inside the cabin. 11-year-old Rebecca helps her mother with breakfast. 8-year-old Mary is getting dressed. She shares a bed with Rebecca in the small sleeping loft. 5-year-old William is just waking up, still groggy. The cabin is one large room with the sleeping loft above. Sarah and Thomas sleep in a bed in one corner, separated from the main room by a curtain. The children sleep in the loft, reached by a ladder. There's no privacy, no personal space, no way to be alone. This is just normal. As the family gathers for breakfast, Thomas leads them in a brief prayer. The Brennans are Methodists, regular church-goers when weather permits, believers in hard work and God's providence. Their faith is both sincere and practical. It gives meaning to the hardship and provides a framework for understanding why they're here and what they're trying to accomplish. After breakfast, the family splits up for the day's work. Thomas and James will spend the day in the far field, harvesting wheat with scythes. Rebecca will help Sarah with washing. It's Monday, wash day, which means heating water, scrubbing clothes on a washboard, wringing them out by hand and hanging them to dry. Mary will watch William and help with small chores, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, pulling weeds in the garden. Everyone works. There's no such thing as childhood leisure on a frontier farm. 2 miles away, in the small cluster of buildings that passes for town, Jacob Morrison is opening his general store. Jacob is 58, a widower whose children are grown and gone. He came west in 1861, not to farm but to do what he knows, run a store. He set up shop here because he recognised that scattered homesteaders would need a place to buy supplies, and he was right. The store barely makes a profit, but it keeps him fed and busy, which is enough. The store is a simple wooden building, 20 feet by 30 feet, with a false front that makes it look taller than it is. Inside, a wooden counter, shelves lined with goods, a pot-bellied stove for heat, and the pervasive smell of tobacco, coffee and dry goods. Jacob's inventory is limited but essential. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, tea, tobacco, nails, tools, fabric, thread, kerosene, matches, ammunition, and whatever else he can get shipped from Oregon City. He orders supplies every few months, and it's always a gamble. Order too much and his money's tied up in stock that might not sell. Order too little and people get frustrated and stop coming. He also serves as the informal post office. Mail comes to the store and people pick it up when they come to town. There's no mail delivery to individual homesteads. If you want your mail, you come get it. Today, there's a small bundle of letters that arrived last week from Oregon City. Jacob sorts through them. 2 letters for families in the area, one for the schoolteacher and one for himself, from his daughter in San Francisco, married to a merchant there, living a comfortable city life he can barely imagine. Around 7 o'clock, Daniel Fletcher arrives at the store. Daniel is 32, unmarried, a logger who works in the forest cutting timber. Logging is the main industry in the Oregon Territory besides farming. Those massive trees are valuable, and there's huge demand for timber in California, and even in cities back east. But it's dangerous work, probably the most dangerous occupation in the territory. Daniel lives in a logging camp about 5 miles away, but he comes to town once a week to buy supplies and get his mail. He's a big man, over 6 feet tall, heavily muscled from constant physical labour. He's also missing 2 fingers on his left hand. A logging accident 3 years ago. He's lucky it was just fingers. Other men have lost arms, legs, or lives. "Morning, Jacob," Daniel says, his voice rough from years of shouting over the sound of saws and falling trees. "Morning, Daniel. Got coffee?" "Always need coffee." Jacob weighs out 2 pounds of coffee beans, writes the price in his account book. Daniel buys on credit and settles up when the logging company pays him, and hands over the package. "Any mail for me?" Jacob checks. "Nothing this week." Daniel nods. He doesn't get much mail. His family is back in Missouri and they're not great correspondents. He's alone out here, like a lot of loggers. It's not a life that appeals to everyone, and it's hard to find a woman who wants to marry into the isolation and danger. While Daniel and Jacob talk, Emily Carter is walking toward the store from the small cabin where she lives alone. Emily is 24, the schoolteacher, and an anomaly in this settlement. She's unmarried, living independently, and employed in one of the few respectable professions open to women. She's also the best educated person in the community. She attended a female seminary in Massachusetts for 2 years before coming west. She came to Oregon for complicated reasons. Officially, she came to teach because there's a shortage of teachers on the frontier. Unofficially, she came to escape expectations back east. Expectations that she would marry, have children, and live a conventional life she found suffocating. Oregon represented possibility, freedom, a chance to be something more than someone's wife. The reality has been harder than she expected. She lives alone in a tiny cabin, earns barely enough to survive, faces constant pressure to marry, several men in the settlement have proposed, and struggles with loneliness and doubt. But she's also teaching 15 children to read, write and cipher, which feels meaningful, and she has her own space, her own decisions, her own life. That's worth something. She enters the store and both men turn to look. Daniel's face changes slightly. He's clearly attracted to her, though he's too shy to say anything directly. Emily knows this and is carefully neutral toward him. She likes Daniel well enough, but she's wary of any romantic entanglement that would end her independence. "Good morning, Miss Carter," Jacob says. "Letter for you." Emily's face lights up. Letters are precious. Connections to the world beyond this isolated valley. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." She recognises the handwriting, her former roommate from seminary, now married and living in Boston. Emily tucks the letter away to read later, in private, when she can savour the news from the world she left behind. "Can I get some writing paper and ink?" she asks. She needs to respond to letters and also prepare lessons for her students. Jacob nods and retrieves the items. Paper and ink are expensive. Everything is expensive out here because everything has to be shipped from somewhere else. But Emily considers them necessities, not luxuries. Education requires materials. While Jacob is helping Emily, another customer enters. A Kalapuya man in his 40s, dressed in a mix of traditional and American clothing. His name is Katsuyama, though the white settlers call him Joseph. He's one of the few native people still living in the Willamette Valley. Most were removed to reservations years ago, but a small number remained, occupying a legal grey area, surviving on the margins of the settler society that displaced them. The atmosphere in the store changes subtly when he enters. The white settlers are polite but wary. Katsuyama has lived here all his life. This valley is his homeland. But the settlers see him as an outsider, possibly dangerous, definitely inferior. The racism is casual and pervasive, so normalised that most settlers don't even recognise it as racism. It's just how things are. Katsuyama speaks English. He had to learn it to survive, and he's here to trade. He has several beaver pelts and wants to exchange them for ammunition and tobacco. Jacob examines the pelts, offers a price, and they negotiate. The transaction is businesslike but not warm. Jacob isn't actively hostile, he's practical enough to trade with anyone, but there's no real friendliness. Daniel watches the interaction with mild discomfort. He's not particularly prejudiced by the standards of his time, but he also doesn't question the basic arrangement where white settlers take native land and native people disappear or survive on the edges. It's just the way westward expansion works, and he's a beneficiary of it even if he didn't personally drive anyone from their land. Emily's more uncomfortable. She's read enough and thought enough to feel that something is wrong here, that the treatment of native peoples is unjust. But she doesn't know what to do about it, and she also knows that speaking up too loudly would make her even more of an outsider than she already is. So she keeps her thoughts to herself, adds them to the private catalogue of ways this society troubles her conscience. Katsuyama completes his trade, nods to the room and leaves. His presence and departure both feel heavy with unspoken things. Displacement, loss, adaptation, survival. The valley used to be full of his people. Now there are maybe 20 Kalapuya left in the immediate area, living in small camps, hunting and fishing where they can, doing occasional labour for white settlers, trying to maintain some connection to their homeland while accommodating the reality that it's no longer theirs. After Katsuyama leaves, conversation resumes. Daniel mentions that the logging company is looking for more workers if anyone's interested. Emily asks if there's been any talk of building a proper schoolhouse. Teaching in the church building is awkward, and having a dedicated school would be wonderful. Jacob doubts there's money for it, but he'll mention it to the other families. This is how information flows in the settlement. Through the store, through church on Sundays, through chance encounters. There's no newspaper, no telegraph, no systematic communication. You learn what's happening by talking to people, and if you don't come to town regularly, you might miss important news for weeks. Back at the Brennan farm, Sarah is heating water for washing. This means filling the large cast iron kettle with water from the well, hauling it to the house, and heating it over the fire. The well is 50 yards from the house. Thomas dug it himself, 20 feet down to reach water. Every bucket of water represents labour. Lowering the bucket, pulling it up full, carrying it to where it's needed. For washing, Sarah needs many buckets of hot water. She and Rebecca work together, heating batch after batch, pouring it into a wooden tub, adding shaved soap, which Sarah made from lye and fat, and then scrubbing clothes on a washboard. It's hard, wet, physical work that leaves their hands raw and red. While they wash, they talk. Rebecca is at an age where she's thinking about her future. In a few years she'll be expected to marry. There aren't many options. Maybe 20 young men of marriageable age in the settlement, and she knows most of them. Her life will likely be similar to her mother's. Marriage, children, farm work, endless labour. She doesn't question this much, it's simply what women do. But sometimes she wonders what else there might be. She's noticed that Miss Carter lives differently, and she's curious about it. Sarah sees Rebecca's interest in Emily Carter and worries about it. She likes Miss Carter well enough, but she also thinks the teacher's independence is unnatural and potentially corrupting. Women need husbands, need families. Living alone is sad, even pitiable. Sarah wants Rebecca to have a good life, and in Sarah's understanding that means a husband, children, a homestead, hard work, and faith. That's what a woman's life should be. They don't articulate these thoughts to each other. They talk instead about practical things. Which clothes need mending, whether they have enough soap when the next batch of laundry will need to be done. But underneath the practical conversation, there's a deeper one about what it means to be a woman on the frontier, what choices exist, what futures are possible. By mid-morning, Thomas and James are in the wheat field, swinging scythes in rhythm. Harvesting by hand is brutally hard work. You swing the scythe low, cutting through the wheat stalks, then gather the cut wheat and tie it into bundles. Your back aches, your arms burn, sweat runs into your eyes. They'll work until noon, rest during the hottest part of the day, then work until dark. And tomorrow they'll do it again. They have about 10 acres of wheat that needs to be harvested before the rains come. Thomas thinks about numbers as he works. If they get a good harvest and the price is decent, they'll make enough to buy what they need for winter, and maybe have a little left over. If the harvest is poor or the price drops, they'll have to make do with less, maybe go into debt. There's no margin for error. One bad year could wipe them out. He also thinks about expansion. He'd like to clear more land, plant more crops, maybe get a few more animals. But clearing land is slow work. Even with James helping, they can only clear an acre or two a year, and that's assuming no major setbacks, no injuries, no disease, no disasters. The forest around them is both a resource and an obstacle, providing timber and game, but also making every acre of farmland a victory won through backbreaking labour. At the logging camp where Daniel works, the crew is already deep in the forest, working on felling a giant Douglas fir. There are 6 men on this job, 2 fallers doing the actual cutting, 2 buckers who will cut the fallen tree into manageable logs, and 2 more who will help transport the logs to the river, where they'll be floated downstream to the sawmill. The tree they're working on is enormous, probably 250 feet tall and 8 feet in diameter at the base. It's been growing here for centuries, long before any white people came to Oregon. Now it will be cut down, turned into lumber, and shipped somewhere to build houses or ships or whatever people build with wood. The fallers are using a 2-man crosscut saw, working in rhythm, pulling the saw back and forth, cutting a notch on the side where they want the tree to fall. It's skilled work and dangerous. If the tree falls the wrong way, someone could be killed. Everyone in the crew knows men who've died in logging accidents. It's the price of working in the industry. Daniel's job today is bucking. Once the tree falls, he and his partner will use the crosscut saw to cut it into sections that can be moved. It's still dangerous. A log can roll unexpectedly, crushing anyone in the way, but not quite as dangerous as felling. The morning wears on. The saw bites deeper into the tree. The fallers judge the cut, check the wind, plan the fall. Everything depends on skill and experience, but also on luck. Even the best logger can be killed by an unexpected twist of fate. At the church building, Emily is preparing for the day's lessons. School runs from October through April, taking a break during the summer months when children are needed for farm work. But Emily likes to come in September to prepare, organise materials, think about what she'll teach. She has students ranging from age 6 to 16, all in one room, all at different levels. She'll need to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, some geography and history. She has few books and limited supplies. Most of what she teaches will be oral, with students practicing on slates that can be wiped clean and used again. As she works, she thinks about the letter in her pocket. She's resisting the temptation to read it immediately, saving it for this evening when she's alone and can give it her full attention. Letters are precious, partly because they're rare, and she's learned to make them last, reading them slowly, savouring the connection to her old life. She also thinks about her position here. She's aware that her independence is unusual and makes some people uncomfortable. Several men have proposed marriage, not out of love, but out of practical calculation. They need wives to manage households and bear children. Emily's educated, healthy, young enough to have children and available. To them it's logical. But Emily doesn't want to be chosen for practical reasons. She wants, though she barely admits this to herself, to be loved for who she is, not for what functions she can perform. And more than that, she wants the freedom to choose her own life. Marriage would mean giving up teaching, giving up independence, giving up the small room of her own that Virginia Woolf won't write about for another 50 years, but which Emily instinctively knows she needs. The sun climbs toward noon. The heat builds. Work continues across the settlement. Thomas and James in the wheat field, Sarah and Rebecca washing clothes, Daniel and the logging crew working on their tree, Jacob minding his store, Katsuyama heading back to his camp with his traded goods, dozens of families on scattered homesteads all working, surviving, trying to build something in this land they now call home, but which was someone else's home not long ago. Around 11 o'clock there's a commotion in town. A wagon is arriving. This is notable because wagons don't arrive every day. This one is driven by a family that's clearly just completed the Oregon Trail journey. You can tell by looking at them. Exhausted, weathered, their clothes worn and dusty, their faces showing that particular combination of relief and uncertainty that comes from finishing one hard thing and facing the beginning of another. The family consists of a man and woman in their late 20s and 3 small children. The wagon is loaded with their possessions, everything they own in the world. The oxen pulling it look as tired as the people. They stop at the store and the man, his name is Robert Hayes, comes in to ask about land claims, where they might settle, what they need to do next. He has the Donation Land Act documents from Oregon City, but he needs advice about where to claim. Jacob helps him as best he can, giving him information about where land is still available, further from town, naturally, what the procedure is, what challenges he'll face. Other people in the store offer advice and warnings. Yes, the land is free, but clearing it is hard. Yes, there's opportunity, but also risk. Yes, you can build a new life here, but it will cost you in ways you can't yet imagine. Robert Hayes listens, trying to absorb information while wrestling with exhaustion and doubt. They've come so far, sacrificed so much. 2 of their children died on the trail, one from cholera, one from drowning at a river crossing. Robert's brother also died on the journey. They sold everything they had back in Missouri to make this trip. There's no going back, only forward. The wagon, the surviving children, the remaining possessions, the claim documents, the advice from strangers. This is what their dream of Oregon has come down to. Now, the real work begins. As noon approaches and the day grows hotter, we can see the settlement whole. Scattered families on homesteads, working from dawn to dusk, trying to transform wilderness into farmland. A small commercial centre emerging around the general store. A teacher trying to bring education to children who might otherwise grow up illiterate. A logging industry extracting timber from ancient forests. Native people displaced but not entirely gone, surviving in the margins. New arrivals still coming, still hoping, still believing that Oregon means opportunity. This is the Oregon Trail's destination. Not the end of hardship, but a different kind of hardship. Not freedom from work, but different work. Not a promised land flowing with milk and honey, but real land that yields only to persistent, grinding labour. And yet people came. Keep coming, will keep coming. Because back east, land is expensive and opportunities limited. Because the frontier represents possibility, the chance to own land, to work for yourself, to build something for your children. Because despite everything, Despite the hardship and danger and isolation, people believe that here they can make a better life. Whether they're right remains to be seen. The midday sun beats down on the Willamette Valley, and for a brief period the frantic pace of morning work slows. Not because anyone stops working, but because the heat makes sustained hard labour dangerous. This is the rhythm of farm life. Work from dawn until the heat forces you to slow down, rest briefly during the worst of the afternoon, then push hard again until darkness makes continuing possible. At the Brennan homestead, Thomas and James have come in from the wheat field. They're both soaked with sweat, exhausted from the morning's labour. Sarah has prepared a midday meal, cornbread, beans cooked with a bit of salt pork, milk from their cows, and water. It's simple food, filling and practical. No one expects variety or luxury. Food is fuel, nothing more. The family eats in near silence, too tired for much conversation. Rebecca asks if they can go to the creek later to cool off, and Sarah says maybe, if the washing is finished and there's time before evening chores. William, the 5-year-old, is cranky from the heat and the boredom of being kept near the house all morning. Mary's picking at her food, not eating much, and Sarah makes a mental note to watch her. Childhood illnesses can come on suddenly, and out here, a sick child can become a dead child before you have time to react. After eating, Thomas goes to lie down for a brief rest. He's not lazy. He's simply learning to pace himself. He pushed too hard when they first arrived, working himself to exhaustion day after day, and he got sick. Lost a week of work, nearly died from the fever. Now he's more careful, taking these brief midday rests, even when there's work still undone. Better to work steadily than to collapse. Sarah doesn't rest. She never rests. There's always something that needs doing, and the household labour falls entirely to her and Rebecca. She checks on the bread dough that's been rising. She'll bake it later in the outdoor oven Thomas built. She feeds the chickens, she checks the garden, pulling a few weeds, noting which vegetables will be ready to harvest soon. She makes a mental list of tasks. The washing needs to be finished, dinner needs to be prepared, tomorrow they'll need to preserve some vegetables, the floor needs sweeping, William's clothes need mending. The list never ends. For a frontier farm wife, there's always more work than time. Sarah has been doing this for 5 years, and she's learned to keep moving, to work steadily from before dawn until after dark, to never expect rest or leisure. This is just her life. In town, the Hayes family, the new arrivals, are dealing with the practical realities of arrival. They need immediate supplies, food, because their trail provisions are exhausted, tools, because some of their equipment broke during the journey, information about where to claim land and how to start building. Robert Hayes is at the general store negotiating with Jacob Morrison. Robert has a little money left, not much, but enough to buy essentials. The question is how to stretch it. Jacob is sympathetic but also practical. He can't afford to extend too much credit to someone who might fail and never pay him back. They work out an arrangement. Robert will pay cash for immediate necessities and can buy on credit once he's established on his claim and can show he's making progress. Robert's wife, Elizabeth, is with the children at the wagon trying to keep them quiet and out of trouble, while also dealing with her own exhaustion and grief. She's 27 years old and has already buried 3 children, 1 back in Missouri before they left, 2 on the trail. The surviving children are a 6-year-old boy, a 4-year-old girl, and an infant son born during the journey. The baby is thin and fussy, and Elizabeth worries constantly that he won't survive. Infant mortality is so common that parents learn not to become too attached until a child survives the first year or 2. Emily Carter approaches Elizabeth, recognizing another woman in distress. "Can I help you with anything?" she asks. Elizabeth looks up, surprised by the kindness. I don't know. We just arrived. I don't know where to start." Emily nods. She's seen this before. New arrivals, overwhelmed, not knowing what comes next. "Let me show you where you can camp tonight. There's a spot by the church where travellers sometimes stay, and I can help you get some water and find some food for the children." Elizabeth's eyes fill with tears at this small kindness. She's been holding herself together through sheer will for months, and this moment of compassion nearly breaks her. "Thank you," she manages to say. Emily helps Elizabeth and the children set up a temporary camp near the church. She brings water from the well, shares some food from her own meagre supplies, and talks to Elizabeth about what to expect. She's honest about the difficulties, the isolation, the hard work, the challenges of building a homestead from nothing. But she's also encouraging. Other families have done it. The Brennans, the Mitchells, the Johnsons, they all arrived with nothing and managed to build something. It's possible. It's just very, very hard. While Emily helps the Hayes family, Daniel Fletcher and the logging crew have completed their morning's work. The giant tree they were felling finally crashed to the ground, a moment of triumph and terror as hundreds of tons of wood fell exactly where they wanted it to fall. Now comes the equally dangerous work of bucking it into logs and getting them ready for transport. Daniel and his partner are using the crosscut saw to cut the massive trunk into sections. It's hot, exhausting work. The saw binds in the cut, requiring wedges to keep it open. Sawdust fills the air, sticking to sweat-soaked skin. Your arms burn, your back aches, and there's always the awareness that a log could shift, roll, crush you against another log or the ground. During a water break, Daniel talks with the other men about plans for Saturday night. There's going to be a dance at the church. Someone's got a fiddle, and people will gather for an evening of music and socialising. It's the kind of event that everyone looks forward to, a break from the isolation and hard work, a chance to see neighbours, to court prospective spouses, to feel like part of a community rather than just isolated homesteaders scattered across the valley. Daniel is thinking about asking Emily to dance. He's been wanting to court her for months but hasn't worked up the courage. She's educated and refined, and he's just a logger with missing fingers and no prospects beyond dangerous work in the woods. But he likes her. She's kind and intelligent, and there's something about her independence that he finds attractive even though he can't quite articulate why. One of the other loggers, a man named Frank who's older and more cynical, makes a crude joke about Emily. Something about how she needs a man to tame her. Daniel feels a flash of anger, but doesn't respond. Frank is the kind of man who sees women as property or prizes, who can't imagine that a woman might have her own reasons for staying single. Arguing with him would be pointless. Back at the Brennan farm, Rebecca and Mary have been given permission to go to the creek to cool off, with strict instructions not to go in the water above their knees and to stay where they can see the house. They walk through the forest path that Thomas has cleared, carrying a pail in case they see any berries. The forest is still dense here, towering trees, thick undergrowth, dim even in midday. It's beautiful in its way, but also slightly frightening. Bears live in these woods, and cougars, and wolves. People have been attacked. Just last year, a child from a neighbouring homestead was killed by a cougar, so Rebecca and Mary stay alert, making noise as they walk, watching the shadows. At the creek, they sit on the bank and dangle their feet in the cold water. It feels wonderful after the morning's heat and work. They talk about small things, the new family in town, what they'll wear to the dance on Saturday, whether Rebecca will be allowed to dance with boys or will have to wait another year. Rebecca is thinking about her future more and more lately. She's 11, which means in a few years she'll be expected to marry. She looks around at the women in the settlement. Her mother, exhausted and aged beyond her years, Mrs. Johnson, who lost 3 children in a single winter to scarlet fever, Mrs. Mitchell, who works just as hard as her husband but has no say in any decisions about their farm. Is this what she wants? But what else is there? She's seen Miss Carter living independently, teaching school, making her own choices. It seems appealing, but also lonely. And Rebecca has also heard the whispered gossip about Miss Carter, how she's unnatural, how she'll regret not marrying when she's old and alone, how she's setting a bad example for young girls. Mary, 8 years old and less reflective, chatters about wanting to see a bear, about how she's going to have a new dress for the dance, about how William is annoying. Rebecca half listens, letting her sister's voice wash over her while she thinks her own thoughts. At the general store, Jacob is helping another customer, Martha Johnson, wife of one of the established farmers in the area. Martha is a formidable woman in her 40s, mother of 7 living children, and mother of 3 dead ones. She's competent, opinionated, and not afraid to speak her mind, which makes her both respected and slightly feared. Martha is ordering supplies for winter, extra flour, sugar, coffee, kerosene. She's also picking up the mail, a letter from her sister in Illinois, who writes faithfully every month with news from back home. Martha treasures these letters, keeps them in a box, rereads them when she's feeling particularly homesick. While Jacob is filling her order, Martha asks about the new family. Jacob tells her what he knows. Just arrived, from Missouri, lost children on the trail, seem decent enough but very green. Martha nods. She'll probably go visit Elizabeth Hayes this evening, bring some food, offer advice and help. This is what frontier women do for each other. Life is too hard to survive alone. They help each other when they can, even though they're all stretched thin. Martha also mentions that her husband John is thinking about organising a barn raising next month. He wants to build a larger barn, and he'll need help. In return, they'll provide food for all the workers, and will help others with their projects when needed. This is how major construction happens on the frontier: communal labour, everyone helping everyone else, an informal economy of mutual aid. By mid-afternoon, the heat is starting to break slightly. Thomas and James head back to the wheat field for another few hours of work. Sarah and Rebecca continue with the washing, which is finally nearing completion. The wet clothes are hung on lines strung between trees where they'll dry in the sun and breeze. Tomorrow Sarah will need to iron them, another day of hot, exhausting work. At the church building, Emily is preparing for a meeting. Every few weeks, the settlement's few educated residents, herself, Jacob Morrison and John Johnson, meet to discuss community matters. They're not an official government, but they make decisions about things like where to build roads, how to handle disputes between neighbours, when to hold community events. It's informal democracy, frontier style. Today they're discussing the possibility of building a proper schoolhouse. Emily has been pushing for this for over a year. Teaching in the church building is workable, but not ideal. The space is multi-purpose, which means her teaching materials have to be set up and taken down constantly. A dedicated school building would allow for better organisation, a permanent library, better facilities for the children. John Johnson is sceptical about the cost. They'd need to buy lumber, hire a carpenter if anyone skilled is available, organise community labour for the construction. It would be a major undertaking. Jacob is more sympathetic. He sees the value in education and likes Emily. But he's also practical about the financial challenges. They debate for an hour, ultimately deciding to postpone the decision until after harvest. If the harvest is good and people have a bit of extra money, they might be able to afford it. If not, the school will have to continue meeting in the church for another year. Emily is disappointed but not surprised. Everything on the frontier comes down to money and labour, both of which are always in short supply. She'll keep pushing for the schoolhouse, but she also knows it might never happen. Many frontier communities never build proper schools. Children grow up with minimal education, learning just enough reading and arithmetic to get by, never developing the intellectual skills that Emily considers essential for full human flourishing. As evening approaches, people begin preparing for night. At the Brennan farm, Sarah is cooking dinner, more beans, some salt pork, biscuits made from the bread dough that's been rising all day. It's similar to lunch because their diet doesn't vary much. They'll eat this meal together as a family, with Thomas leading them in evening prayers, thanking God for the day's work and asking for strength to continue. After dinner, there are still chores: animals to feed and water, eggs to collect, wood to bring in for tomorrow's fires. James helps his father. Rebecca helps her mother. Mary and William are sent to bed early. By the time the sun sets around 8 o'clock, everyone is exhausted. But before sleep, there's a small moment of leisure. Thomas reads aloud from the family Bible, one of their few books. His reading is slow and halting. He's not particularly literate, learned to read only as an adult, struggles with longer words. But he persists, reading a few verses from Psalms, words about God's providence and protection that take on special meaning when you're isolated in a wilderness, dependent on weather and health and luck for survival. Sarah sits with her mending, listening. She's too tired to really focus on the words, but the sound of Thomas's voice and the familiar rhythms of Scripture are comforting. This is their evening ritual, the way they mark the day's end, remind themselves why they're here and what they're working toward. In town, Daniel has walked to Emily's cabin. He's brought a rabbit he shot earlier, A gift, though he'll pretend it's not. "Thought you might want this," he says, holding out the cleaned animal. "Got lucky hunting today." Emily knows this is courting behaviour. Men bring women gifts, especially meat, which is valuable. She should probably refuse, make it clear she's not interested in being courted, but she's also practical, and fresh meat is genuinely useful. "Thank you," she says, accepting the rabbit. "That's very kind." They talk for a few minutes awkwardly. Daniel asks if she's coming to the dance on Saturday. She says she is. He asks if he might have a dance. She says perhaps, not committing either way. He leaves feeling both hopeful and uncertain. Emily watches him go, feeling conflicted. She likes Daniel well enough. He's kind, hard-working, respectful. But she knows that if she encourages him, he'll propose, and if she accepts, her independence ends. She'll become Mrs. Fletcher, a logger's wife, and teaching will stop. That's how it works. Women choose between independence and companionship, between freedom and security. Very few manage to have both. At the logging camp, the men are settling in for the night. They live in a rough bunkhouse, one large room with bunks along the walls, a stove in the centre, and not much else. It's crowded, smelly, loud. Men snore, talk, argue, tell stories. Privacy is impossible, but it's shelter. And after 14 hours of hard labour, most men fall asleep despite the noise. Daniel lies in his bunk thinking about Emily, about the dance, about his future. He's 32, not getting any younger. Most men his age are married with children, but logging pays better than farming, and the work keeps him away from any settled community where he might meet marriageable women. The few women on the frontier are already claimed or are looking for something he can't offer: stability, land, a future beyond dangerous work in the forest. He thinks about Emily's cabin, small but her own, with books on a shelf, a desk for writing, curtains at the window. He imagines what it would be like to come home to that cabin, to her, to have a home instead of a bunkhouse. It's a nice dream. But he's practical enough to know that dreams don't always come true, especially for loggers missing fingers who live in labour camps. At the Hayes family camp, Elizabeth is trying to get the children settled for sleep. The baby is fussy and she's worried he's getting sick. The older children are frightened by the darkness and the unfamiliar sounds, the wind in the trees, animal noises, the general strangeness of this new place that's supposed to be home but doesn't feel like it yet. Robert is checking their possessions, making sure everything is secure for the night. He's also thinking about tomorrow. They need to go see the land they'll claim, start figuring out where to build, what to do first. The enormity of the task ahead is overwhelming. They have a wagon, some tools and determination. They need a house, a barn, cleared fields, crops, animals, and about 1,000 other things. How do you start? Where do you even begin? He remembers the advice people gave them back in Missouri. Don't go. Oregon's too far, too hard, too dangerous. Stay here where you have family and community. But Missouri offered them nothing. They were tenant farmers, poor, with no prospects. Oregon offered land, free land if you could get there and prove you could farm it. So they went, despite the warnings, despite the risks. And now they're here. And the warnings were right. It is too far, too hard, too dangerous. They've already paid a terrible price. 2 dead children, Robert's brother dead, months of misery on the trail. But there's no going back. They've committed everything to this. They have to make it work. Elizabeth finally gets the children to sleep and sits beside the wagon, too tired to sleep herself. She thinks about the graves they left behind. Her daughter Emma, age 7, dead of cholera somewhere in Nebraska. Her son Samuel, age 4, drowned crossing the Snake River. She doesn't even know exactly where they're buried. Just somewhere along the trail, marked with crude wooden crosses that will rot away in a few years, leaving no trace. Is this worth it? This land they haven't even seen yet, this life of hardship they're choosing? She doesn't know. She doesn't know anything anymore except that they're here, they're alive, and tomorrow they'll have to start building whatever life is possible. As night deepens, the settlement grows quiet. At scattered homesteads, families sleep in rough cabins, exhausted from the day's work. In town, Jacob Morrison banks the fire in his stove, and goes to bed in the small room behind his store. Daniel Fletcher falls asleep in the bunkhouse, surrounded by snoring loggers. Emily Carter reads her letter from her friend in Boston by candlelight, getting news of a world that seems impossibly distant. Theatres, lectures, bookshops, conversations about ideas rather than just about survival. Somewhere in the forest, Katsuyama sits by his fire, thinking about the valley as it used to be. His people lived here for thousands of years. They had villages, seasonal camps, established patterns of life that worked with the land rather than trying to transform it. Now they're gone mostly. Dead from disease, driven to reservations, scattered and broken. He's one of the few who remained, and he knows he'll probably be the last. When he dies, the Kalapuya presence in this valley dies with him. He doesn't hate the white settlers exactly. They're just people trying to live, same as everyone. But he mourns what was lost, not just his people, but the old way of life, the old understanding of how to live in this place. The settlers are trying to make Oregon into something it isn't, trying to make it like Ohio or Missouri, farming land that's really forest land, fighting against the rain and the trees instead of living with them. They'll probably succeed, he thinks. There are so many of them and they keep coming. They'll cut down the forests, drain the wetlands, kill the game, turn everything into farms and towns, and maybe they'll be happy with what they've built. Or maybe they'll realise too late that they've destroyed something beautiful in their effort to create something familiar. The moon rises over the valley, illuminating scattered cabins, the small cluster of buildings that constitutes town, the vast forests that still dominate the landscape. This is Oregon in 1870, a society in transition, a land being transformed, people trying to build new lives while dealing with grief, exhaustion, uncertainty, and the sheer physical challenge of surviving in a place that doesn't easily yield to human will. Tomorrow will bring another day of work, another day of survival, another day closer to either success or failure. The wheat needs harvesting, the washing needs finishing, the trees need cutting, the children need teaching, the land needs clearing. The work never ends. But people persist, they endure, they hope. That's what frontier life means. Persistence in the face of overwhelming difficulty, hope despite frequent disappointment, determination to build something better even when the cost is almost unbearable. The night deepens, stars wheel overhead. In the forest a cougar screams, and somewhere a child wakes crying from the sound. In a cabin, a woman soothes her baby while worrying about whether there's enough food to last the winter. In a bunkhouse, a man dreams of a life he'll probably never have. In a tent by the church, newly arrived settlers sleep fitfully, exhausted but anxious about the future. This is Oregon. This is what came after the trail. This is the reality behind the dream of free land and new beginnings. It's harder than anyone expected, lonelier than anyone imagined, and more expensive in lives, in health, in everything sacrificed to get here and stay here than anyone could have calculated. And yet people keep coming, keep trying, keep believing that somehow it will be worth it. Whether they're right, only time will tell. The night settles fully over the Willamette Valley, bringing with it a darkness that modern people struggle to imagine. There are no streetlights, no electric lights from windows, no glow from distant cities. When the moon is hidden by clouds, the darkness is absolute, a physical presence that presses in from all sides. At the Brennan homestead, the family's asleep. Thomas and Sarah in their bed behind the curtain, the children in the loft above. But Sarah's sleep is restless, broken by worry. She keeps thinking about Mary, who didn't eat much at dinner. Is the child getting sick? Should Sarah have noticed something earlier? Out here, a child's illness can turn deadly before you realise how serious it is. Scarlet fever, diphtheria, pneumonia. They kill quickly, and there's little doctors can do even when they're available, which they usually aren't. Sarah finally gives up on sleep around 2 a.m. and goes to check on Mary. She climbs the ladder to the loft quietly, trying not to wake the other children. She touches Mary's forehead, warm but not burning. The child stirs, murmurs something, settles back into sleep. Sarah watches her for a moment, this daughter who might live to adulthood or might be dead within a week. There's no way to know. You just have to trust in God and hope. She climbs back down and sits by the dying fire, too awake now to sleep. She thinks about the life they've built here, such as it is. 5 years of work, and what do they have to show for it? A rough cabin that leaks when it rains hard. 15 acres cleared out of 320. A subsistence living that requires constant labour just to maintain. No luxuries, no comforts, no leisure. Just work and more work and the hope that eventually it will get easier. But will it? Thomas is 36 now, and the work is aging him quickly. His back hurts constantly. His hands are calloused and scarred from accidents. He has a cough that never quite goes away. How many more years can he keep doing this level of physical labour? And if something happens to him, if he's injured seriously or gets sick or dies, what happens to the rest of them? Sarah knows the answer. She would be a widow with 4 children and a partially cleared homestead. She'd probably have to remarry quickly, to whoever would have her, whether she wanted to or not. A widow with children is a burden, not a catch. She'd have little choice in the matter, or she might lose the land entirely, be forced to return east to family, admit that the whole Oregon venture was a failure. These are the thoughts that come in the dark hours, the fears that she keeps at bay during the day through constant work. She sits by the fire and prays, not formal prayers with pretty words, but desperate, inarticulate pleading. Keep us safe. Keep us healthy. Help us survive. Let this be worth it. Please, God, let this be worth it. At the logging camp, most men are sleeping, but Daniel Fletcher is also awake. He's been thinking about Emily, about the dance on Saturday, about the future he wants but probably won't have. He's tried to save money, tried to imagine buying land, starting a farm, having something to offer a potential wife. But logging doesn't pay that well, and injuries eat up savings fast. He's 32 with nothing to his name but his strength and his skills, and even those are depreciating assets. He thinks about the men he's known who died in logging accidents. Young men mostly, killed by falling trees or rolling logs or simple bad luck. There's no pension for loggers, no compensation for widows. You die, and that's it. Your body goes in the ground, your possessions get divided among whoever wants them, and the work continues without you. Is that what his life will amount to? Years of dangerous work, ending suddenly in a moment of crushed bone and blood, leaving nothing behind? Or will he be one of the ones who survives into old age, crippled by accumulated injuries, unable to work anymore, ending up as someone's charity case? He wants something more than that. He wants a home, a family, a reason to keep living beyond just the next day's work. Emily represents that possibility. Not just because she's a woman, but because she's someone who thinks about more than just survival. She reads books, has ideas, sees the world as something more than just an endless series of tasks to be completed. Being around her makes him feel like there might be more to life than he's experienced so far. But he also knows he's probably not what she wants. She's educated from a good family back east. He's just a logger. Why would she choose him? Across town, Emily is also awake, reading her letter from Boston by candlelight. Her friend Susan writes about attending a lecture series, about discussions of women's suffrage, about new books and ideas circulating in the East. The letter is full of life and intellectual engagement, and it makes Emily ache with loneliness. She made a choice to come to Oregon to teach, to have independence. She doesn't regret that choice. But she didn't fully understand the cost. She thought she was choosing freedom and opportunity. She didn't realise she was also choosing isolation and limitation. There's no lecture series in this settlement, no bookshops, no conversations about ideas and philosophy and social reform. Just survival, work, and the constant pressure to abandon her independence and marry. She thinks about Daniel and his awkward courtship. She likes him. She genuinely does. He's kind and respectful, which is more than can be said for many men. But if she marries him, what happens to her? She becomes a logger's wife, living in a camp or a rough cabin, bearing children, working constantly, losing her identity as Emily the teacher, and becoming just Mrs. Fletcher, someone's wife. Is that better or worse than the loneliness she feels now? She doesn't know. Sometimes she thinks marriage might be worth it just to have companionship, someone to talk to in the evenings, another human presence in the endless isolation. But then she remembers what marriage means for women. The loss of legal identity, the endless childbearing, the complete subsumption into domestic labour, and she pulls back from the idea. The letter from Susan mentions that several of their mutual friends have married. They seem happy, Susan writes, though also tired and overwhelmed by domestic duties. One friend has already had 2 children in 3 years and is pregnant again. Another friend married a doctor and has a comfortable life but seems bored and restless. The men make all the decisions, control all the money, determine the course of their families' lives. The women manage households and raise children and have very little say in anything else. Is that what Emily wants? Is that what any woman should have to settle for? She doesn't know. All she knows is that she's 24 years old, living alone in a frontier settlement, teaching children who will probably never have opportunities beyond subsistence farming or logging, and wondering what her life will look like in 10 years, or 20, or when she's old and alone as everyone predicts she'll be. At the Hayes family camp, Elizabeth is also awake. The baby is finally asleep after hours of fussing, and she's taking this moment of quiet to process everything that's happened. They're here. They actually made it. But at what cost? She thinks about Emma, her 7-year-old buried somewhere in Nebraska. Emma loved to sing. She had a sweet high voice, and she used to make up songs about everything. About the wagon, about the oxen, about the landscape they were passing through. Then she got sick. One day she was fine. The next day she had a fever. 3 days later she was dead. They buried her in a shallow grave because the ground was hard and they couldn't dig deep, and they had to keep moving because the wagon train wouldn't wait. Elizabeth doesn't even remember exactly where. Somewhere between Fort Kearney and Chimney Rock. Just somewhere on the endless prairie, marked with a wooden cross that probably blew over in the first strong wind. Her daughter is gone, and Elizabeth doesn't even know where. And Samuel, her 4-year-old. He drowned at the Snake River crossing. The wagon went into the water, the current was stronger than expected. Samuel was washed out of the wagon before Robert could grab him. They never found his body. He's just gone. Somewhere in the river, swept downstream, disappeared. How does she keep living after that? How does she get up in the morning and do the work that needs doing and care for the surviving children and act like everything is fine? She doesn't know. She just does it because there's no alternative. The living need her. Robert needs her. The children need her. So she keeps going, keeps functioning, even though part of her died with Emma and Samuel. And now they're here, and they're supposed to build a new life, supposed to make it all worthwhile. The sacrifices are supposed to mean something. But right now, sitting in the dark beside a wagon full of everything they own in the world, Elizabeth can't see how any amount of free land could possibly be worth what they paid to get here. Robert is awake too, sitting on the other side of the wagon, thinking similar thoughts. He's the one who decided to come to Oregon. Elizabeth didn't want to leave Missouri, even though their prospects there were limited. She wanted to stay near family, near the familiar. But Robert convinced her. He talked about opportunity, about land, about building something for their children. He promised it would be worth it. Now 3 of those children are dead, and he's the one who brought them on the journey that killed them. How does he live with that? How does he face Elizabeth knowing that his ambition and optimism and dreams cost them so much? He doesn't have an answer. He just has the knowledge that they're here now and going back isn't an option. They've spent everything to get here. This has to work. He has to make it work. Has to somehow justify the terrible cost by building something successful. Otherwise it's all been for nothing and for. The night wears on. In scattered cabins across the valley, families sleep or lie awake worrying. Farmers worry about harvests. Wives worry about sick children. Men worry about injuries and death. Women worry about pregnancy and childbirth, which kill regularly on the frontier where medical care is minimal. Everyone worries about money, about surviving the winter, about whether this whole venture will succeed or fail. At the store, Jacob Morrison is asleep but dreaming uneasily. He dreams about his late wife, who died 3 years ago from a fever. He dreams about his daughter in San Francisco, living a comfortable city life, so far away she might as well be on another planet. He dreams about the store failing, about being old and alone with no one to care for him, about dying and being buried in this frontier cemetery far from the place where he was born. He wakes around 4 in the morning, disoriented, not sure where he is for a moment. Then memory returns. He's in Oregon. He's a widower running a store that barely breaks even. He's 58 years old and will probably die here, buried beside his wife in a cemetery that might not even exist in 100 years, when this whole settlement is either abandoned or transformed into something unrecognizable. Is this what he thought his life would be when he was young? Did he imagine himself here, in this place, at this age, alone? He doesn't remember. Young people never imagine getting old, never imagine ending up in unexpected places, living unexpected lives. But here he is. He gets up, lights a candle, and sits at his desk. He has letters to write, orders to suppliers, correspondence with his daughter, business records to update. The work never ends, but at least it gives him purpose. At least he's useful. That's something. Around 5 in the morning, the darkness begins to lift slightly. It's not quite dawn, but the sky starts to show the first hints of grey. This is the hour when people begin to stir, to start another day of work. At the Brennan homestead, Sarah is already up. She never really went back to sleep. She lights the fire, starts preparing breakfast. Another day begins. Thomas and James will return to the wheat harvest. Rebecca will help with household tasks. The younger children will do their small chores. Everyone will work from dawn to dusk, as they do every day, as they'll do tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Sarah feels the weight of it. The endless repetition, the grinding routine, the knowledge that this is her life and will continue to be her life until she dies, or becomes too old to work, at which point she'll be a burden on her children. But she also feels something else, a quiet pride in survival. They've made it 5 years. They haven't failed. The children are mostly healthy. The farm is functional. They're surviving. That might not sound like much, but it's everything. So many families don't make it. They arrive full of hope and dreams, and within a year or two they're dead or gone or broken. The Brennans are still here, still fighting, still hoping that eventually maybe it will get a little easier. At the logging camp, men are waking, preparing for another day of dangerous work. Daniel stretches, feels the familiar aches in his shoulders and back, checks his injured hand. The 2 missing fingers sometimes hurt, phantom pain from something that's no longer there. He eats a quick breakfast of coffee and hard bread, then heads out with the crew to another section of forest where another giant tree waits to be felled. Emily wakes to the sound of birds. She lies in bed for a moment, watching the slowly lightening sky through her window. She has lessons to plan, students to teach, a life to live. The loneliness is hard, but the independence is real. She makes her own choices, controls her own time, answers to no one. That's worth something. Maybe it's worth everything. She gets up, washes her face in cold water, dresses, and begins her day. She'll teach reading and arithmetic to 15 children who might not otherwise get any education. That matters. That's meaningful. Even if no one ever builds her the schoolhouse she wants, even if she lives and dies alone in this settlement, she'll have done something important. She'll have given children tools to make their own way in the world. At the Hayes family camp, Elizabeth wakes to find Robert already up, looking at a map of the area, trying to decide where they should claim their land. The baby is still sleeping, miraculously. The older children are starting to stir. Today they'll go look at potential home sites, start making decisions about their future. Elizabeth feels exhausted before the day even begins, but she also feels a tiny spark of something that might be hope. They're here. They survived the journey. Now they have to survive settlement, one day at a time, one task at a time. Just keep moving forward because there's no going back. As the sun breaks the horizon, spreading golden light across the valley, we can see the settlement whole. A few dozen families scattered across the landscape. A small cluster of buildings trying to be a town. Vast forests still dominating the view. The Willamette River flowing through the valley, source of water and transportation. Mountains visible in the distance. The Cascades to the east, the Coast Range to the west. Beautiful, dangerous, full of possibility and peril. This is what the Oregon Trail led to. Not a promised land of easy living, but a real place where survival requires constant work and sacrifice. A place where dreams meet reality, and often break against it. A place where people nevertheless persist, building farms and families and communities against enormous odds. What can we learn from this single day in 1870 Oregon? Perhaps this, that the frontier experience was far harder than the mythology suggests. The Oregon Trail wasn't an adventure, it was a desperate gamble that many lost. The free land wasn't free. It cost lives, health, years of brutal labour. The promise of opportunity was real for some but hollow for others. The people we followed, Thomas and Sarah, raising children in a rough cabin while breaking their bodies on hard labour. Rebecca, 11 years old, already thinking about a future that offers limited choices. Emily, trying to maintain independence in a society that offers women almost none. Daniel, risking his life daily for wages that will never let him build security. Jacob, growing old alone, far from where he started. The Hayes family, grieving their dead children while trying to build something from nothing. Katsuyama, watching his people's world disappear, surviving in the margins of the society that displaced them. Each of them represents something about the frontier experience. The Brennans represent the typical settler family. Hard-working, faithful, barely getting by despite enormous effort. Emily represents the exceptional woman who tried to forge an unconventional path and paid for it in loneliness and social pressure. Daniel represents the working class, men who did the dangerous work that made settlement possible, but who rarely got to benefit from land ownership themselves. Jacob represents the merchant class, necessary for community function but always one bad season away from failure. The Hayes family represents the new arrivals, still traumatized by the trail, facing the overwhelming task of starting over. Katsuyama represents the original inhabitants, displaced and mostly forgotten, their presence erased by the narrative of westward expansion. Together they show us what settlement really meant: hard work, frequent failure, constant danger, limited opportunities, and the grinding reality that most people's lives were spent in subsistence labour, with little chance for anything more, but also resilience, community formation, genuine achievement despite difficulty, and the building of something new in a place that required enormous effort to inhabit. The mythology of the American frontier emphasizes freedom, opportunity, and adventure. The reality was labour, loss, and limitation. Most settlers didn't get rich. Most didn't even achieve real prosperity. They survived, if they were lucky, and built modest lives through constant effort. That's not the story we usually tell, but it's the story that needs telling. It's also important to acknowledge what this settlement was built on: the displacement of native peoples. The Kalapuya and other tribes who lived in the Willamette Valley for thousands of years were removed, their land taken, their way of life destroyed. The settlers didn't generally see themselves as conquerors or colonizers. They saw themselves as people trying to build new lives. But the effect was the same. Native peoples were dispossessed so white settlers could claim the land as their own. This isn't about judging the settlers individually. Most were ordinary people making choices within the limited options available to them. But it is about understanding the full picture, that the free land of the Oregon Trail wasn't free at all. Someone paid for it, and that someone was the indigenous peoples whose homeland was taken. Similarly, we should acknowledge the gender dynamics of frontier life. Women worked as hard as men, but had far fewer rights and choices. They couldn't own property in their own names if married. They couldn't vote. They had limited educational opportunities. Their lives were largely confined to domestic labour and childcare. Women like Emily, who tried to forge independent paths, faced enormous social pressure and few good options. The frontier is often portrayed as a place of freedom, but for women it was often just a different form of restriction. Yes, there was more flexibility in some ways, necessity sometimes pushed against convention, but the fundamental patriarchal structure remained intact. Women's labour was essential to settlement, but they had little control over their own lives. As the day we've been observing comes full circle, dawn returning after night, work beginning again after brief rest, we can see these patterns clearly. The Brennan farm will look much the same tomorrow as it did yesterday. The logging camp will cut another tree. The store will serve customers. Emily will teach her students. The Hayes family will take their first steps towards settlement. Katsuyama will continue his marginal existence. Nothing dramatic will happen. Life will just continue, day after day, season after season, year after year. And that's perhaps the most important thing to understand. Frontier life wasn't dramatic. It was routine. It was work. It was getting up every day and doing what needed doing, whether you felt like it or not, whether you were healthy or sick, whether you were heartbroken or hopeful. It was persistence in the face of difficulty, endurance when enthusiasm failed, survival when thriving wasn't possible. Some people broke under the strain, families abandoned their claims and went back east. Men drank themselves to death. Women died in childbirth or from exhaustion, or from diseases that would be treatable today. Children died from accidents or illness at rates we'd find shocking. The settlement cemetery was filling with graves, most marked only with rough wooden crosses, some with no markers at all of them representing dreams that ended in Oregon dirt. But others survived. They cleared their land, built their farms, raised their children, formed communities. Over time, the settlement would grow. More families would arrive. The town would get a proper schoolhouse, maybe a church, eventually a post office. Roads would improve, the isolation would decrease slightly. Oregon would become less frontier and more settled society. The people we followed will age. Thomas and Sarah will work themselves into old age, hoping their children will have slightly easier lives than they did. Rebecca will probably marry, probably have children of her own, probably work just as hard as her mother. Emily might stay independent, teaching for decades, or she might eventually marry, giving up her autonomy for companionship. Daniel might die in a logging accident, or might survive to crippled old age, or might somehow achieve the security he dreams of. Jacob will grow old in his store, will die, will be buried beside his wife. The Hayes family will either make it, successfully settling their claim, or fail and disappear from the historical record. Katsuyama will die, probably the last Kalapuya in the valley, his people's presence reduced to place names and half-remembered stories. This is what happens after the Oregon Trail. This is what settlement actually meant. Not the exciting journey westward that dominates the mythology, but the years and decades of hard labour that followed. The building of homes and farms and communities in a place that didn't yield easily to human ambition. Was it worth it? That depends on who you ask and when you ask them. In moments of success, good harvests, children surviving, communities forming, probably yes. In moments of loss, dead children, failed crops, exhaustion, loneliness, probably no. Most people probably felt both things at different times, just as we do about our own life choices. What we can say is that it cost far more than most people anticipated. The free land cost lives, health, years of labour, and the dispossession of native peoples. The promise of opportunity was real for some, but empty for many. The dream of the frontier met the reality of hard physical limits, limited resources and human vulnerability. And yet people kept coming, kept trying, kept hoping that somehow they could build better lives in Oregon than they had wherever they came from. Some succeeded, many didn't. All of them worked harder than most of us can imagine, endured more than we'd want to endure, and survived, or didn't, in a world far harsher than anything we experience today. As the sun rises over the Willamette Valley on this ordinary September day in 1870, the people we've followed begin another day of work. The cycle continues. Life continues. The slow, grinding process of turning forest into farmland, of building settlement from wilderness, of transforming Oregon from frontier into home. All of this continues. This is their story. Not the dramatic tale of the Oregon Trail journey, but the quieter, harder story of what came after. The story of survival and persistence. The story of communities forming in isolation. The story of dreams meeting reality and sometimes breaking, but sometimes, just sometimes, coming true. And perhaps that's the real Oregon Trail story. Not the journey itself, but what people built at the destination. Not the adventure of travel, but the endurance of settlement. Not the promise of the frontier, but the reality of the work required to live there. The sun is fully up now. The day has begun again, and somewhere in this valley, Thomas picks up his scythe, Sarah stokes her fire, Rebecca wonders about her future, Emily opens her school books, Daniel heads into the forest, Jacob opens his store, the Hayes family looks at their unclaimed land, and Katsuyama sits by his fire watching the world change around him. This is Oregon 1870, this is the settlement, this is what the trail led to, and this is what it meant to live it